Oh,
Hey, hello there.
yeah, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Asti. You can call me Obsidian or you can just call me David. That's my real name, whichever one is easier for
I'll
you.
I'll make a note of that.
Yeah. Uh, well, let's not jump right into it. How was your afternoon?
Yeah, it's good. Just been working. It's the first day off from the first day back from work, well, from the break. So it's just been getting back to waking up early, and I'm a bit sick.
Hmm.
I may have Omicron. Who
Oh,
knows?
you
Yeah,
know,
so it's fun.
in my job, I'm constantly in like supermarkets and stuff, and I don't, I stopped wearing the mask after I got vaccinated, and I haven't gotten sick yet, knock on wood, but I'm just in my mind thinking I must have a really good immune system because I don't think there's any way I haven't been exposed to it yet.
No, I mean, I always think that I've had a good immune system, and I work entirely from home. So I don't actually leave the house. I am a bit terminally online. I don't leave the house very often. So it's actually kind of scary how I may have it. I haven't done the test, but yeah, no, it's so I'm feeling a bit under the weather.
Well, yeah, I hope you start feeling better, and definitely
Yeah,
probably some rest will help with that.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
Uh, Yeah, so the topic of discussion today, I guess, is it's neopronouns, but also just how language is formed in particular. Um, I have a couple things that I've written out, but I mean, if you have like an opening statement or just a platform that you want to set as your standard, we can start with that, or we can start with a question, an opening question that I have.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I mean, I don't have a statement prepared as such, but I think some background into maybe, well, I guess who we are, which I guess fields we're coming at this topic from,
Mm-hmm.
might be helpful not only for ourselves but also the potential listeners. So just to kind of say a little bit about who I am, I'm a language teacher and a language researcher. I mainly focus on modern languages, particularly English and Spanish. I've studied ancient Greek and Latin at an undergraduate level, and I have a master's and PhD in contemporary social linguistics, which is the study of language and society. And the entire discussion that we have today is going to be framed within that field of study, which is the intimate relationship between the languages that we speak, we conceptualize, and the societies that, well, conjure them, speak them, reject them. As for that, my specialism is particularly in language ideologies, which are how people think about languages on a relatively macro scale, not individual people, but rather institutions, administrations, societies. Uh, yeah, so that's basically what that's the lens through which I'll be discussing all of these topics, neopronouns, trans issues if we get to them, which no doubt we will if we talk about neopronouns, and language itself. So that's kind of my brief but opening statement.
Okay, that's a good deal. My background is essentially I have a undergraduate degree in liberal studies, and I know liberal studies doesn't really always convey what you actually learned, and I'm pretty sure that that it varies dramatically department by
Hmm.
department. But in the college I went to, the purpose of our liberal studies department was generally speaking to give a person a very well-rounded understanding of the history of intellectual thought and how ideas have progressed over time. So they made us read a lot of old philosophers, and they made us read a lot of old science and see how scientific ideas have changed. Like Aristotle used to think that, earth, wind, and fire and water were
Right.
the
Yeah, the
elements. Yeah.
elements.
And so like we learned how science is, like how it started and how it has been progressing over centuries. So I guess my background is just I've read a lot of philosophy and works of science, and if I was educated properly, then I have somewhat of an understanding of how these ideas have developed over the course of history.
I mean,
And
the historical. Sorry, gone.
I guess when it comes to this topic, I'm addressing it from a philosophic mindset. I mean, I'm obviously not like a language researcher, but when I consider how language is formed, the way I see it is that we form concepts first. Like we see a thing in the world, and without having a word for that thing, we still see it and recognize it. And in order to communicate the thing that we see and recognize, we need to create a word that corresponds to that thing. And
Yeah, sure.
my understanding stems from essentially that essential principle.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to give the impression that, I mean, again, for those who are listening, this discussion stems from a Twitter debate
Yeah,
that we've had over the course of several days now. So, I don't know if you're going to post a link to some of those, or even some screenshots
Yeah,
in the.
I guess I'll have to include that in the video or like in the description.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
may just have
I
it.
think that'll
Yeah.
be really useful, because again, a lot of the things that I want to talk about will stem directly and reference verbatim those tweets. But of course, with the understanding that Twitter is rubbish because it's extremely limited, and that's why we're doing this. Really, at least that's why I want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to give the impression that you need an advanced degree in linguistics to talk about linguistics. People talk about language all the time. I think there's a slight issue when folk linguistics, so what lay people think of language, kind of becomes intertwined with what languages should be or how they shouldn't be perceived.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that we can go into later, but I'm not suggesting that I'm right just because I have a degree in language, right?
Right.
I don't want to give that impression at all, and that's why I'm here. You have a very, shall we say, peculiar take on language,
I
and
guess. Yeah.
I'm interested to explore that. It's frankly not something I've seen very often, so I'm intellectually curious about it.
Okay. Well, let me elaborate about it because over the course of the Twitter argument, I did have to uh like formulate some of the ideas on the spot and make some distinctions. And I think there's one distinction that I didn't really articulate very well in the conversation because we were talking about language changing based on needs and language changing based on wants. And
Yes.
the conception I have is that we form words out of need first. Like when it comes to communicating stuff about the objective world, which in like prehistoric times, like that was more important than it is now. Like we words that we need tend to come before words that we want. And when it comes
Okay.
to like really serious discussions, we tend to stick to words that we need. Like we don't use words like poggers and others in other slang when we're like having a deep intellectual discussion because we know that those words are in a separate category of seriousness compared to like other words. Like I don't know if there's like I hope you get what I'm saying. Like do you get the
Oh
gist?
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. So I mean, again, different languages used in different contexts, but in the context of urgency and seriousness, then we in our linguistic toolkit we select the words which are most appropriate for that, well, objective or setting. It's called linguistic register. So yeah, okay, I get the basic principle of that. So in a historical perspective, or with a historical perspective rather, people conjure words based on needs. The issue I had was, well, we don't live in the past, we live in the present, and people modify language, erase language, conjure language based on wants all of the time. And I actually do have a very good example of that, if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so let's just imagine a household, a very small context. You have a relatively, let's say, conservative family. Not that it's relevant, but just to kind of conjure this image. And in this household, the children are prohibited from speaking in a way which the parents consider to be grammatically incorrect. Give an example: they are encouraged to say "the dog and I" rather than "me and the dog."
Mm-hmm.
Implementation of these corrections is based on a linguistic want, not a linguistic need, right? And that desire, that want, is coming from what? There's no need for that family household to prescribe to conventional or standard grammar forms, right? It's coming directly from a want. It's based on societal expectations of what's appropriate language and what isn't, or maybe even linked to levels of education or a propriety. So it's just an example I thought about today while I was walking the dog. of, well, hence the dog and I, of how easy it is to think of examples of how we pick languages based on wants all the time.
Uh, so I agree mostly with yeah, I wouldn't disagree at all that we change language based on wants, but the particular example that you gave, I think there is an objection that can be made. Because from what I understand, the use of proper quote unquote proper English aimed at developing is aimed at giving a person the ability to use that serious language that we talked about previously. Because proper English, like correct, like you feel free to disagree with this, but proper English is aimed at being able to convey like important ideas.
Yeah, okay, I get that. It's a good consideration. I mean, I do disagree. By the way, I teach English,
Mm-hmm.
both to children and to university students, academic English that is. And even though my personal and kind of social linguistics beliefs challenge this idea of correct language, I know that in a real world, I have to correct them. So, very frequently I've lectured on linguistic prescriptivism, linguistic descriptivism, saying that, I don't personally like the idea that we force children to write in a particular way. Yet
Mm-hmm.
when they write in their exams, I have to mark them down if they make a conventional grammar mistake. So I do understand that. But there's no need. It's still a want. The desire to conform to what society has deemed an appropriate or correct version of language is not strict need in the evolutionary sense. It's literally, and I will use this term quite a lot in this discussion, a social construction. Specifically, if we want to get technical, it's the construction of a language ideology of standardness, the standard language ideology.
Well, yeah, I
So yeah,
do. Yeah, I do agree that some of the really pedantic stuff like marking somebody down for like a incorrect grammar. At a certain point, there's diminishing returns with that. Like you do have to
yeah, yeah.
have you do have to have like a baseline, but once you're involved in the language, you get what the person's trying to say, and there's less specific need to harp on certain things like that. So I agree with that. Uh, I'm not sure. Get
Just to
yeah.
further contextualize, sorry. With the example of the dog and I and me and my dog, the reason I picked that example over other examples, of which there are many, the different spellings of their, our, right,
Mm-hmm.
which have a bit more merit in terms of the thing you're trying to say. But with my example of the dog and I and me and my dog, the assumption of incorrectness is purely grammatical. It's only because of Old English, how that was stylized on Latin, and how we should have accusative forms and nominative positions, or vice versa. That's the reason why it's considered to be, well, formal. Actually, no difference between the dog and I and me and my dog, other than the assumption that one is correct and one is incorrect. So I just wanted to make that clear before we continue, if we are going to continue with those examples,
Yeah, yeah.
why I picked that one specifically, and that's, I think, a relevant detail.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that the syntax of that makes very little difference. Uh, but as it relates to neopronouns, I think that there is a difference in the meaning that is conveyed there because we both like when you say the dog and me and my dog, it's me, which is referencing you, and dog, which is referencing dog, and we have two specific things that are referenced there with information conveyed between them. But I think that there are going to be cases with the usage of neopronouns where there's information that is relevant that is missing that could have been better conveyed by words like he and she. And
Yeah, and
yeah,
so go on.
yeah, I have an example of this. Like, I would say
I,
that
I love I love examples. So go on.
yeah,
Yeah,
the reason that most languages, well, this is an argument. Like, I'm not saying this as a fact, but I'm arguing that the reason that most languages have gendered terminology is because most societies recognize that there are important differences between men and women that need to be sort of understood at like a base level. So one of those differences is strength, and that's why most societies have an understanding that men are not supposed to hit women. So if we were talking about a instance of physical altercation between a man and a woman, if I say he hit her, that's going to be interpreted differently than she hit him, because there's the implicit idea that a man hitting a woman is more severe than a woman hitting a man. And those pronouns in that instance convey the severity that is understood by the society. And if we were to take that same scenario and have it say something like Z hit them, then that information is not in there. And to get that information, we have to ask for clarification, which we wouldn't have to do with the traditional pronouns.
That's that's a good point, right? It's a good example. In not that I'm subscribing to the idea that all men or most men are stronger than women. I mean, that is a debate which I can't go into because my field is social linguistics rather than biology. But I would disagree with the essentialist, the generalized view that that's true, because there are plenty of counterexamples in many different ways. But to talk about the language, yes, you are right. As it stands right now, 2022, Z is nebulous, right? And further information would be required as to the physical strengths of that person. That's true. That's true. However, pronouns are referential. They refer to something all the time. Like you mentioned before with my dog and I, we know that the word I refers to someone in the same way that we know that them refers to someone too. This issue of lack of clarity can be solved with more context. Yes, language is economical. We should strive to convey the most meaning in the fewest amount of words. At the same time, we don't have to do that. We can just give context. Again, I don't believe all of the time that he is stronger than her. So in the sentence, she hit him, it could very well be the case that we're talking about, some 6-foot woman, abusing a weaker man, which does happen. Not as frequently as the other way around, but, it does happen. In isolation, to say that he hit her or she hit him is always going to have that connotation. I think would be a bit too much of a generalization, because there are counterexamples. I do acknowledge that some nuance is lost with the neopronouns.
Right. Well, okay, I'm glad that we got that acknowledgement, and I do acknowledge that it's not going to be the case that every man is stronger than every woman. I think that at a population level we would see that, but at the individual level we wouldn't. But I mean, unless are you advocating that we need to change that dynamic in society? Like, do you think that the assumption that a man hitting a woman is bad is a dynamic that needs to be altered?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm not going to come on here and say that. I don't think anyone should hit anyone, really. I know it's a bit of a blasé, bit of a generic take, but no, I'm not advocating, nor would I ever defend that women or any people of any gender or kind of persuasion should be hitting anyone in an abusive context.
Well, yeah, because the way I see it is, I will never hit a woman unless a woman hits me first. Like I don't have a problem. I think that like once violence has been enacted, it's really up to you to decide how you want to deal with it. But like in general,
that's a tricky. I mean, I personally don't agree, and I don't think the scope of the discussion fits within that realm. So
right.
I would be happy to move on to something else. But let's
go back to neopronouns. But so my issue is the loss of nuance once we get to, not nuance, but what is the term you use, like communicative? I refer to meaning. Like I think that neopronouns convey less meaning.
One of the words you used, which I will problematize if given the opportunity, whether it's relevant or not, is your use of the word efficiency. Right. So one of the primary words that you used is that the use of neopronouns makes communication less efficient because it doesn't refer to something in objective reality. At least that's how I understood. That's how I understood your argument, right?
Yes. I mean, you can say yeah. You can say that.
But even better, what you've just said now, lack of nuance, is much better phrased because it has a completely different kind of sets of reference, which is kind of better to argue with from my worldview, which is that of social linguistic constructivism, because we've already talked about how there's one aspect of gender which is erased by using neopronouns, but that's kind of the entire point. Those gendered assumptions about people are ways of how people identify. And people who use neopronouns do not want to subscribe or attach themselves or associate themselves with these, well, gendered stereotypes, right? Such as men are stronger, women are weaker. And neopronouns are a way of disassociating yourself from, well, the entire mess of gender in the world. I think it's successful that it lacks nuance in that way. Maybe it's intentional.
Yeah, but is that good? Like just because you use neopronouns doesn't make you not a man or a woman. Like a person
No,
can believe that, just because I am a male doesn't mean I'm not as doesn't mean that I'm stronger than a woman, but
right, right.
that belief can't be translated. Like they can't really act on that belief because that might lead them to think that a fight against them and a woman is fair.
At the same time, if a trans person, let's say male to female, and someone who takes hormones as well, let's say that they are in the early stages and they are somewhat debilitated by that transition, even though they are biologically a male, that doesn't mean automatically that they are going to be stronger than females. So it's it's just not as applicable as I think. I think these isolated hypothetical kind of situations, when you actually look at real case scenarios, I just don't think it's as applicable.
Uh, well, I don't know. I kind of have to disagree. Like I know that not every man is going to be stronger than every woman, but I think that the majority of men are going to be stronger than the
Well,
majority of
well,
women.
and to not use qualitative terminology, so quantitative terminology. Yes, some men are stronger than women, right? Yes, I get that, right? That's fair
I
enough.
wouldn't say some, I
Um,
would say most.
I'm not going to make that statement because I haven't seen the data and I've not done the data. It's, and if you have that, that's I'll accept that. I won't leave it without looking at it, but I can't say that the majority are because I haven't looked and I haven't confirmed that, but confirm those data.
Okay. Uh okay, well yeah, I'm sure I have that data. I don't have it on me right now, but I'm sure I could pull
Yeah,
that
fair
data.
enough.
Yeah. Uh but I mean, my concern is that I want people to be able to express a broader range of characteristics that are outside of what is typical of their gender, but I don't want us to be throwing out things that are important. Like we can have neopronouns still as long as they don't result in people not understanding basic things about themselves. And
The people who use neopronouns have gone through lengthy processes of self exploration, have decided that certain categories that are widely circulating in society don't fit them. And a way of showing that disconformity with those expectations, they've modified their linguistic, well, practices and vocabulary to reflect that, well, new knowledge, newfound knowledge of, well, I'm not a stereotypical man. I'm not a stereotypical female or woman or whichever kind of category we're fitting into.
yeah,
So
and
I think the people who do use neopronouns have done a lot more self exploration and kind of soul searching than people who just kind of grow up with a penis and think that they're a man.
well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think
Which
that.
aspect of that entire little monologue?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think necessarily that they've done more soul searching. I just think
Okay,
they've
fair enough.
done a
Yeah, fair
yeah
enough.
a different
Okay,
kind.
yeah,
And
sure,
like
sure.
I would ask these people, well, what is a stereotypical man? And if I'm pretty sure I don't fit the stereotype of man. Like I don't like to lift weights. And I'm very like fashion conscious. I don't like to lift weights, and I'm very fashion conscious. So like neither of those are like stereotypical male traits, but I don't think I've never really considered that to mean, oh, I must be non-binary and now I need new pronouns like that. My brain just didn't go there, and I think it's because I'm not really involved in a particular sort of internet subculture that thinks that if you don't fit the magazine cover idea of masculinity, then you're non-binary.
Yeah, but at the same time, I imagine that you don't wear dresses and you don't wear makeup. So there are going to be elements of gendered culture and society which you do
Uh,
subscribe to.
well, actually, I have a little scar on the side of my face right here that I put a little bit of cover up on, and I do that like every day.
Okay, well, I mean that's. I mean, I'm
I
not
don't
gonna.
know if that's the same as wearing makeup. Like I don't do it, to make myself look feminine. I just do it to cover up a scar that I don't like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a yes and a no situation. Yes, you are technically wearing makeup, but it's not quite what I'm referencing here. I mean, if we can avoid makeup
Right.
entirely and
It's
go
not
for
makeup.
gendered clothes.
I get it.
Yeah,
It's not wearing makeup for the same reason that other people wear makeup. Where they wear
yeah.
makeup to look prettier, I guess. I don't know, or to look a certain way.
And just to reference this fact as well, this idea that in Western culture, especially, I mean, not, I mean, if we go outside of the Anglosphere, we can see that culture diverges in many different ways, which is often overlooked in these discussions. Um, you know, this idea that women tend to wear dresses, there's absolutely no basis in biology. Right now,
Mm-hmm.
you could if I imagine if we go into history, we might be able to pick up some utility issues that stem from climate or whatever. But right now, as it stands, little girls, they want to play with toys, they want to play with little babies, they wear pink and wear dresses. They don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the aspects of gender which are socially constructed and normalized through well, a gendered society which we live in.
So I do agree that specific clothing choices they have to be mostly socially constructed. Like I think that there might be a biological basis, big might, and I am going to make an argument for that, but I'm gonna get to that later. But I do agree that they are largely socially constructed, and that they might have a biological basis. But even when it comes to, like you mentioned, little girls wanting to play with toys, like there have been studies done on children and toy preference that have shown that little boys will tend to fixate on moving objects like a truck or like a mobile or something, and that little girls, like girl babies, will fixate on like doll faces and that type of stuff, and that sort of points at a quote unquote gender difference that exists even in early infancy. And I know that that's just one example, and you could argue maybe that they are being pushed towards that. Although, I mean, you would have to read the studies and come to your own
Yeah, for
conclusions
sure.
about. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But the other thing I want to bring up is I don't know if I posted this in that Twitter thread. I may have, but one thing I was drawing a lot from was this cross cultural study. They did a survey of conceptions of cuteness in the United
Mm,
States,
yeah.
Jerusalem. No, it was like Israel and Japan, and the results that they found were essentially that females or women have a higher, they report higher sensitivity to cute things in general, and it even extends to inanimate objects. And this is where like the theory part comes in. You can freely disagree with this, but I think that the fact that it extends to inanimate objects sort of suggests that there may be just an underlying uh for women, there could be an underlying like biological process or mechanism that leads them to perceive like even inanimate objects as cute more than a man would, and that could affect their decision making when it comes to what type of clothing they wear.
Right, and as I said in the, I think I said at least I thought it when in relation to this article, which I do remember by the way. I haven't read it yet, but it was acknowledged. My argument still is, even in light of those data, cuteness still is socially constructed, but it may the what humans consider to be cute have some kind of relationship to biological features like wide eyes or smaller bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think because of that, because studies have found that in different contexts, which is great. I do like the fact that you chose a cross-cultural study, because one of my biggest criticisms, if that study is, it's not only one, but it needs a much more diverse selection of data to make essentialist claims that categorically, essentially, women, those I guess, however you define it, what people who have
Mm-hmm.
vaginas, they are more fixated with these things which are inherently cute than people who have penises, who are who are less fixated with these other things which are distinctively, categorically not cute. I think that's a bit of a push. I still think there's a lot of social constructiveness in here because, well, what we consider cute nowadays differs not only in cultures but across time, and that is the crux of social constructiveness. So I'm not so sure, but anyway,
I could use an example of that, like if you
yeah, sure, go ahead.
no, I'm asking like the idea that cuteness has varied across cultures. Like I'm not opposed to that idea, but I would need to see an example to like really
Oh, right.
understand.
So you're asking for an
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
Yeah, sure, right. Well, I guess the idea that people with ragged beards is seen as scruffy, unkept, and unhygienic
Mm-hmm.
in some cultures, but it's seen as manly, aggressive, sexy in others. I mean, I don't want to generalize here, but I do believe that in some parts of Japan, there's affinity towards, manly men just because it's so contrastive with um, average Japanese working man who is clean shaven and wears a suit. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not talking about cuteness as such, but I mean, I guess that's a different social category, which is handsome, right?
Yeah.
With
Or
cute,
like aesthetic appreciation. I'm not sure if handsome falls into cute or like simple aesthetics because I think there is a difference in like most of the things I've read. Cuteness is associated with like babies and small things, and I'm not sure if that I'm not sure how that correlates with like aesthetic sensibilities, like appreciation of like symmetry and that type of stuff.
I mean, to be totally honest, I've not done any research. No, I don't think the average person has either on what is cute.
Mm-hmm.
This is admittedly a personal observation rather than a professional one. So I don't know. I don't know what different cultures consider cute. But if I were to bet my money on, I would know that what people constitute as cute has varied not only across time but across space. And if something ticks those boxes, it's very likely on the spectrum of constructivism versus essentialism. It's very, very often, if not always, going to be on the constructivist side. So, yeah,
Well,
um,
I could see that being true for objects, but I can't really see it being true for like babies and like small animals because the whole idea behind cuteness
yeah,
sensitivity is this idea that evolution gave not just women but women and men, but women to a greater extent a propensity to like see a small baby and identify it, and that activates uh protective behaviors in them, protective like parental type behavior. So it's like you see something cute and you want to like protect it, like keep it with you.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's yeah.
Yeah, on the surface, from a pop psychology point of view, I'm not going to disagree with that. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not a psychologist.
Yeah, but I mean like
Yeah, fair enough.
in your daily life, like if you see a child, like I don't know, I can't really speak for you, but like there have been times where like I'm in a supermarket and I see a little kid running around and I'm like kind of like paying attention to make sure it doesn't do anything that'll get it in trouble. Like I'm not going over there, but I am aware of this baby and I'm like making sure that it doesn't like hurt itself or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we have an instinctual, across the board to protect our young. I think that is something that's biologically innate.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna. I don't think the desire to look after children is socially constructed.
Yeah.
Ways in which we do that, the ways in which we consider some things to be more appropriate or better than others. Yeah, I think that those elements are socially constructed. But I think a misconception in a lot of talking points is that lefties or constructivists completely ignore the relevance of biology or how things are, or in some way do stem from biology. Like, when we say that we support trans rights and we support linguistic forms which help trans people, I'm not saying that people, not men, they have changed their chromosomes. It's something I've seen quite frequently, like this assumption that we think that, but no, I don't think that's true. I think we do look at things with nuance,
Well,
and
it
yeah.
depends on who you're talking to, and
Well, yeah.
maybe the fault is mine for taking every like random person on Twitter seriously because you can't even tell if any of these people mean what they say sometimes. But I definitely have argued with people who will say that like no, a trans woman is a female, and by getting the surgery, they have removed their sex and that type of stuff. So I think it definitely does depend on who you're talking to. And my fear, and I think the fear of a lot of like gender critical people, is that like when you say things like, "Oh, nobody's actually saying that," like you're really like gaslighting because a lot of us have argued with those types of people.
Maybe that's because of circumstance then, because again, you have to acknowledge that people who are conservative, they circulate in, well, different social contexts than, well, someone like me who is distinctly not conservative. So we will across the board interact with different people. So maybe it is a mismatch of different realities coming into clash here, because the type of people who conservatives will associate with will be quite different to the ones that non-conservatives do. And that is a generic claim. I acknowledge that. I'll admit it. But maybe that's the reason. But as for gaslighting, I'm not so sure, because um, leftism or constructivism is very often regarded as a disregard for science, and they'll find that that's not the case, right? Not to cast shade on you here, but in a moment of anger, you described my field, or sorry, the field, which the macro field, so not even my field, but kind of entire area of human study that includes mine and others, to be pseudoscience, right? So you do have to face this stigma, and I just don't think it's grounded.
Right. So let's actually address that because I wouldn't have said that if there wasn't like a grain of like my true feelings in it. And I will admit that I was a little bit triggered then because I felt like
Yeah, yeah.
we started off with like a good faith conversation, and then suddenly this guy's like, oh well, you don't even have a sociology degree, you can't talk about this, and that kind of pissed me off. So like uh I was kind of drawing from things I heard from other people because, admittedly, I don't really know a lot about sociology. After that incident, I did go and watch some videos, some like intro to sociology videos, and it seems like it's mostly social constructivism and
It
understanding
is. It
that,
is.
yeah, and understanding that human beings learn most of their behaviors, which is like obviously true. Uh, so in that regard, I can't say that it's a pseudoscience because a lot of the conclusions of sociology are obvious and like they're true just by virtue of like you pointing out like, hey, this is a learned behavior. But I guess my concern is that a lot of social constructivists, they don't they exist purely in the realm of theory, and they don't inform their theory with science from time to time.
Yeah, so I've got a very good counter to that point, and it's being a bit pedantic, and I apologize for that, because I believe what you mean by science is distinctively qualitative research data. So basically, the study of numbers, percentages, fractions, basically observations about the world relative to a population, the study of frequency, lack of frequency. That's called quantitative data. Now, I think something that's quite important to consider is that a lot of sociological data is based on qualitative data. It's based on observing what people think, what they feel,
Mm-hmm.
opinions, expressions, and many of these things we can't quantify. Hence, why it exists, right? I mean, if we could only do quantitative research, academia would be in a mess,
Mm-hmm.
because some things you just cannot put on a Likert scale, and if you do, you're missing a lot of nuance.
Right.
So
Right.
my own research, just to kind of contextualize this, I couldn't have done my doctoral studies on based on percentages. I had to go to the context I went to, and I had to interview the students and ask them a certain set of questions. I could not have found the answers to my research questions without actually interacting with them. So I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, when you say science, I believe you mean quantitative analysis, and you are not considering the legitimacy of qualitative data, which sociology is based on. And that's not to say that there's not quantitative data. There's thousands of it. Qualitative data is relevant and legitimate and important too. That's my argument.
Right, right. Well, to clarify, like I don't really have strong opinions about sociology. Like I said, I mostly said what I said because I was kind of triggered. But uh, as opposed to as with reference to the question of qualitative versus quantitative data, um, I guess I do rely on quantitative data a lot. But when it comes to issues regarding gender specifically, one of my big gripes with social constructivism is the lack of reference to like neuroscience and things like Big Five personality metrics. Like they don't seem to really wrestle with the
No, they don't. You're right.
with the implication of those other fields, and that's what I mean when I say like they exist too much in the realm of theory. Like I think that any good study should try to get out of theory and test its theories in the real world or compare it to the findings of other fields that may have something to say about that. For
Okay.
example, let me give one example.
Yeah, sure.
Like a big gripe what I have with the idea that gender is entirely socially constructed is that we kind of know for a fact that hormones play a major role in behaviors, like specifically the hormone levels that you're exposed to when you're in the womb and your hormone levels that you have like circulating in your brain. Like both of those things, the ones that you experience in the womb can have permanent changes in like your behavior, and the hormones that you have circulating, that is not permanent, but like that can affect your mood and like your outlook on things pretty dramatically. So for me, I wish that social constructivists would try to incorporate this in the way that they understand gender instead of talking purely theoretically.
Okay, so I have two things to say about that. I'll start off the positive and then I'll kind of go on to the negative. Well, absolutely right that researchers, sociologists, linguists, gender theorists, philosophers, we do need more intersectionality and more interdisciplinarity. That's true. This is a common like criticism of my field when we go to international conferences. We talk about language and identity, yet how many collaborations do we do with psychologists? Not many. Maybe we should change that, right? So this is a discussion that's happening right now in contemporary social linguistics. Like there is an acknowledgement we do need to do more intersectional and interdisciplinary research. So I'll definitely give you that. The issue I have though is when you say that we are focusing too much on theory. Problem is all of this qualitative research that I'm talking about is done with participants.
Mm-hmm.
Not much of it is actually done with theory. So basically, what we do is we go out in the world, we observe, we describe, and then we theorize based on observed data.
Mm-hmm.
So we listen to what people themselves think about gender rather than saying, hey, gender should be this based on this, which I can't, that's what essentialists do. They prescribe, they say, well, biology should work in this way according to this data. We say, well, going to listen to the people who think about this, have their own opinions. Let's see what they say, and let's describe the world on that basis. So that's why we call it descriptivism. Linguistics is descriptive because we don't prescribe. Schools do. We don't. We listen and observe. So to say that our research or sociology or social linguistics is based too much on theory, I think it lacks nuance because a lot of our data listens to real people who have real experiences in real contexts, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. I get what you're saying, and the part that I disagree with is it's valuable to ask people about their experiences, but I don't think it's correct to take their self-reporting as like the absolute truth, because I'm sure you understand people can be wrong about even their understandings of themselves. Like that's why a real easy example is the Dunning-Kruger effect. A person who is not good at something thinks that they are good at something. Like our perceptions of ourselves are not always aligned with reality. That's why I try to see past the person and try to understand underlying things when I can. Like it's not always possible to see past the person, but I always have a little bit of doubt when it comes to self-reporting just for
Right.
that reason. Yeah.
Yeah. So as a research tool, this has been, this is not a novel topic, right?
Hmm.
The complexities and the issues that arise from self-reporting have been widely documented in most constructivist research that's qualitative, right? We know that self-reporting is limited. We know that people can change their opinions. Like if you do a focus group one day and you interview the same group of people 3 weeks later, there could have been several circumstances, completely related or unrelated, that completely modify their views on a particular topic. Right? I think legitimacy of self-reporting is that when you're looking at social issues, you need to speak to the social people. You need to speak to the society in which it exists. Right. So my
Hmm.
point of view, which does diverge from yours, my point of view is that gender is primarily, and I will use that word this time. I'm not using that. I'm not going to shy away from using that language. My opinion is that gender is primarily, at least nowadays, socially constructed. Therefore, we should ask society what they think about language because that is the world in which it exists in. People create language, people reject language. Sorry, people create gender, people reject gender, people transform gender. Right? And that's exactly what we're seeing with neopronouns, problematizing antiquated associations of sex and gender, which no longer fits a section of society, the people who use gender pronouns,
Yeah,
neopronouns, sorry.
I wanna address the one part you said, like people create gender and people create language. Like the genders that the legacy genders that were created had specific functions that they filled in society, and it seems to me like a lot of these new genders that are being created do not have a specific function. It's like men are the ones that pick up the heavy things and like do the dangerous work, and women are the ones that are they're more social and they take more caretaking roles, blah blah blah. And we can it's one thing to say that we create genders, which I don't think is super accurate. Another way to conceive of it is that gender kind of emerges as a result of our circumstance. Now, it might not be the case that might not be the case anymore in 2022, but the genders male and female or man and woman that we had, they weren't completely arbitrary. They were related to a survival strategy. And I don't
Yeah,
think
okay,
that the
right.
new
Yeah.
genders are in that way.
Okay, right. So yeah, okay, fair enough. I'm not going to deny that in its history, sex and gender were once conflated. They absolutely were, right? If you go back to ancient Greece, we'll see it. If we go back to ancient Egyptians, we'll see it. Although, with that acknowledged, I will say that there is some obvious examples of gender blurredness in ancient societies.
Hmm.
But to kind of diverge from that point, yes, you're right in that respect. Um, in history, I mean, you used the past tense several times there. Gender was once conflated with sex, but we are literally right now in 2022 observing people willingly, consciously disassociating that once previous connection of gender and sex. Now, just because it's new, like you pointed out at one point, doesn't mean that it's wrong or it doesn't mean that it's right, but it is happening. What sociologists and what social linguistics do is they say, okay, rather than debate whether this is right or wrong, that's not for us to say. We're just going to observe the people who are already doing this. This is not theory. I mean, this is why I had an issue with your theory criticism. We actually see on Twitter all of the time how people are using neogenders. They are legitimized by others accepting those neogenders, right?
Right. I think you missed part of that response. Like for me,
Yeah. So what's the other half I
yeah,
was missing?
the question for me is it a gender if it doesn't have a societal function? Because the genders that we had, they had a explicit societal function and expectations of those. And so, like, can you even call the neogenders genders if they don't have an
That's
explicit societal function? Like, is,
See,
is it is it the same concept?
that's a very interesting question, right? I like that. I like that. I'm gonna give you that. I like that question. Um, Probably, maybe not. Maybe we'll get to a point in the future where gender is completely abolished. I mean, people are directly have the aim of abolishing gender, right? They
Mm-hmm.
they specifically have that goal in mind. I'm for it.
Yeah.
I don't mind.
I mean, yeah,
But
I'm pretty pro gender abolition too. Like, I think that we have advanced past the point where explicit, gender roles are needed. I mean, we still need men to do the heavy lifting and that type of stuff. But like,
I
other, yeah.
think a transhumanist world, and by this I mean like machinery rather than trans people. Um, I don't think we do.
Well, I mean,
I,
well, we have machinery, but I don't have a forklift at my house, and I might need to move a table.
yet,
And if I need to move a
yet.
table, I'm gonna preference asking a male before I ask a female. Now, if a female's there, then I'll you're the only one here, and you got to help me. But there's still those like sort of underlying things.
I mean, I wouldn't do that, but I mean that is definitely a personal thing rather than
Hmm.
like a society thing. So before we go back to language, which is why kind of I'm here, and I think we have diverted from language quite a bit,
Hmm.
in many ways. When I gave my little rant before, um, I didn't address a part of your question. I can't remember which one it was. Do you still know which part I didn't answer? If
Uh,
not, like no worries. But
I thought that was related to the specific roles. Is that what we're talking
no,
about?
yeah. I mean, it's because we're talking about so many things.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I can't remember. It might come up later. But there was a point I wanted to make, but I'm fried. I just don't know. So, if possible, I would like to go back to language,
Hmm.
because a lot of the things that you're saying here now differ quite significantly. I mean, even your tone and your kind of persona, the debate persona is radically different
Oh yeah,
now
the
than
way
what
I
it
the way I
is.
act on Twitter is much different than the way I actually talk to people because like I go into Twitter with like a confrontational mindset because I just expect people to be talking shit about me the whole time basically.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'm not going to comment on that because it's your life, it's your YouTube channel, it's kind of your personal time. But I will say though that I've at least tried to be. Um, I've engaged with you in good faith, even if I do. Basically, let's put it this way: if you were to write an essay for me in one of my social linguistic courses, and you to have made the arguments that you made, you wouldn't have passed.
Okay.
I will have.
On what basis then?
Just I mean, just because the quality of the arguments themselves just didn't make no sense. Now, it's a bit of an unfair assessment to make. I'm going to give you that, right? Because one, you're not doing a course in social linguistics, and two, I'm not your professor, and three, you haven't done the research yet, right? So I'm being slightly uncharitable here. I will say that you coming into these discussions with a confrontational mindset is hindering, I believe, your openness to accept new ideas.
I mean, I'm willing to accept new ideas if they're backed by data. Like the easiest way to change my mind is to show me, like a study or something that shows that what you're saying, you know, has been, you know, has been actually backed by something. But what I kind of dislike when people will just make a fact statement and I'm just expected to believe it. I'm just like, well, what? This is true because you said it. Like you need to give me a reason to think that what you're saying is true.
I mean, Twitter isn't an academic forum. I mean, it's severely limited in its word count, which I've struggled with. I struggle with frequently.
Right, right. But you'll
People
notice that, like, when I make a claim, like, I
do
pretty much always have something to back that up. Like, I very rarely will
do.
make a claim that I haven't actually researched. And I feel like that is not true of the other side. Like, when I argue with social constructivists, they just kind of make fact statements and it's just true because they said it. And I'm just not satisfied by that.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's fair enough. I get that, but you also have to acknowledge that people don't go on Twitter with the expectation that they need to provide academically based data to support their claims. Like pretty much everything that I've said, I could give 50 separate articles on every singular topic that I've talked about because I've done the research, right? Like this is my profession.
Mm-hmm.
I am a social linguist, right? I don't use quotations and things because I do that every day. When I go on Twitter, I like to have discussions, especially when people make spicy claims like you did about language. But it's the medium. It's the medium.
So
I think me.
what's the spicy claim? I really need to understand
Yeah, sure,
what
right.
I
Yeah,
said
so
that was so wrong.
there are two. There are two. There are two. First, and again, I don't know if this is because A, you came in with a confrontational mindset, and or B, um, the language itself wasn't entirely clear. Maybe because you haven't got a background in sociology, or again, or maybe it's the fact that Twitter doesn't allow for a detailed response. But the two spicy takes for me is one, that language needs to be rooted in objective reality. I think the issue there is with the actual definition of objective reality. And the second one, so there are actually three issues. One we've already talked about. So the first one is objective reality, that language needs to kind of reflect objective reality. I fundamentally disagree with that. Second, that language creation must stem from a need rather than a want. Again, that's a fundamental disagreement of mine. The third one is, oh, what was the third one? The objective of language is to be as efficient as possible, and the fact that people use neopronouns lessens that efficiency. Therefore, it's not as valid. I disagree with that. Also, those are go against the central tenet of social linguistics, which is that we construct languages that are inherently social, dynamic, and ideological. I think different ways those three perspectives that you have uh, disagree with the basic tenets of the field.
Okay, well, let's get into the discussion of objective reality because I think that my argument here is pretty strong. Like, we
Yeah, let's
started this
go.
off referring to how a person has a concept in their mind before they have a word for it. So you can imagine yourself, in the state of nature, and you you need a rock to break open like a nut or something. Now you don't have a word for rock, but in your mind you know what that thing is that you need. Like you have experienced rocks before. You know that they're hard and that they can break things, and that the rock refers to something that exists in the world.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, yeah.
And so the word rock refers to something that exists in the objective world.
So when I challenge your like discussion of subjective reality and the need for words, I do actually understand what you mean. Like I get it, right? So we things exist, right? I'm not going to say objective reality, but things exist, and humans have a need. Hence, why you use the word need
Mm-hmm.
to utter a way which is understood by many what that category or what that concept or what that object is. Right? So the combination of r, o, k makes in our brains this image of a rock, and we've all agreed on this, and we continue to agree on it. So now we have a mental image that the combination of the r, o, k sound is, well, that thing that you can smash a cow with, right? I
Mm-hmm.
get that. I fully understand that. I do think that you're a bit based in the past because not only have we advanced beyond the point that we do not need direct associations with language, i.e., metaphors, similes, well, the entire genre of science fiction, the words in the English language right now that don't have a basis in you deem objective reality. Now, I will say this again, and I'm doing this on purpose because we've already talked about this. And I wanted to explain it a bit better because I couldn't on Twitter. And that's the word and.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The reason I believe and isn't based on objective reality is because and is a grammatical phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Additions exist in, I guess, I don't want to go into that mathematical debate, but the word and signifies two joining ideas,
Mm-hmm.
which is represented grammatically with, well, the combination of those three sounds. There's no objective reality connected with those combinations of sounds. It's entirely constructed.
Okay, well, my rebuttal to that would be that it's not, a physical objective reality, but it's more so related to the way human beings perceive of the world. And one of the things that we are able to perceive is a multiplicity of objects or a difference between objects.
Yeah, yeah, and in order to represent those that complex thought process, we've conjured up this this grammatical concept, which symbolizes to the speakers, the interlocutors, that we are talking about addition or multiplicity or whatever. Yeah, I get that. I get that. But either the term objective reality is not entirely descriptive of what you mean, or it's just not quite representative of how language works. I'm going to continue with that second one.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, let me make
another,
one caveat
yeah,
there is
sure.
that, you know, nouns will pretty much always refer to objective reality. Some other things like conjunctions and that type of stuff refer to how human beings perceive of things. And I could argue that the fact that we perceive it, you know, means that it's objectively true. But I think that that's kind of like a moot point, because like at the end of the day, like things like and don't have a physical presence. Their presence is only as concept, and whether or not concepts are objectively true is like it's kind of muddy territory. But we do
Well,
know
and
that
this,
human beings have concepts.
yeah, yeah, of course we do. Now, this is the thing, right? And this is why I disagree with your objective reality thing, because we can use the same logic that we've just used then to include or not include the word and, the conjunction and, as part or not as part of objective reality, as we can do with pronouns. So he and she, yes, they do have more, not entirely, but they do have more of a biological basis. And if we include biology as part of objective reality, then okay, I'll accept that. But their them, other neopronouns, they are on the same level of conceptualness as and, yet have an issue with that.
Yeah, but and isn't a pronoun though. It serves a different function in the language than a neopronoun.
Okay, it does. So why? So even but and is much more difficult to conceptualize in this way, because xer or xem does have referential value. It always refers to a person who has decided to use those pronouns. So again, contextually, it does have a real world, physical, objective referential value. You may not know a lot of information about that person. You might not know if they have a penis, if they have a vagina, if they are on hormones or not. You might not know if
Mm-hmm.
they are physically strong or physically weak. But the referential value exists in what you would call an objective reality. So what I didn't understand in this Twitter discussion is why would talk about and in such a way, but was so dismissive of neopronouns when it's basically the same thing.
Okay, well, my response would be that I get what you're saying by, you know, neopronouns refer to a person who wants to use neopronouns. The problem is that when it comes to regular pronouns, we don't use them because we want to use them. We use them because of the rules of the language that we use. So the imposition of neopronouns specifically because somebody wants to use them is a deviation from the formula that we've used previously.
Yeah,
I
no,
can,
you are
yeah.
right. You are right, right? You are bang on there, right? Now, thing is though, is that rules change. And we are seeing this now with personal pronouns. Now, this is not going to go away, I don't think. I don't think this is a fad. I don't think this is a niche subculture. We are observing technology influencing the use and the history, the evolution of English. Because this pronominal substitution, so, or pronominal personification, catering our personal pronouns to our desires or to our personal identifications, this is new.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, it wasn't new because there was an assumed assumption that if you had a penis, you were a man. The conflation of male and masculine, the conflation of female and feminine. Now, is it a coincidence that in an era when people are problematizing that conflation, that we start to see changes in the language itself? No, it's absolutely not. It's consequential. It's not a coincidence.
Right, and I
Right?
would have less problem with it if the words actually described something. But like, can you tell me what the difference is between a zimzer and a zhir? Like, is there like the problem I have is that these words are kind of
Not
just
really, no.
being made up at will, and they don't really convey anything specific. And
Well,
yeah,
they do. They are specific in they convey a lack of compliance. So, have you ever heard the phrase that sometimes silence is deafening? Right.
right, right.
So sometimes we don't need explicit detail to kind of operate in the world. Sometimes the lack of something, the rejection of something, is as powerful as the message itself. So the use of personal pronoun of neopronouns already from the offset assume a non-conformity with gender stereotypes. That tells me a
Yeah.
hell of a lot about a person.
I like that you said non-compliance because I sort of agree. And let me just ask: do you think that an employer values non-compliance?
Well, I don't think employers should have a say in what we do with languages, right?
But I mean, they do have a say in who they hire. Like the
They
employer is not
do, they
determining.
do.
Like so, if a pronoun like if a neopronoun signals non-compliance, then it's not really a stretch of the imagination that this person might be difficult to work with, and I don't want to hire them.
Well, I think that person is bigoted, and I think, not to be spicy here, but I think if you're going to make such leaps, I think you probably shouldn't be employing people, because I think in a world which is constantly trying to manipulate us, in a world which is constantly favoring those in power and the rich, I think non-compliance is actually a good personal attribute. But yeah, I will acknowledge the fact that yes, some employers might say, right, okay, you're non-compliant, you're going to be a problem worker. You're probably not going to sit down and work 9 to 5 without, shutting your mouth and having issues. You're probably going to complain a lot. Let me hire someone else. Yeah, people are absolutely going to do that, and you do live in America, I believe.
Yes.
So not to be particularly cruel here, but from what I've seen, America does have a very, very toxic labor market and a labor structure, which we don't really have in other countries.
Yeah,
So,
it's pretty bad. It's especially bad right now.
I mean, the lack of unionization, the labor laws. I mean, this whole thing with Kellogg's, we can clearly see that, non-conformity should be kind of encouraged in that context. But anyway, I don't think that's the point you wanted to make. And let's go back to the language.
Right, right, right. So uh, going back to the neopronouns, like I could, you know, I could see them being used if there
Are
was
though they are being
something.
used?
Yeah, no. Like I wouldn't complain as much about them being used if there
Do you mean
was.
normalized, like become part of, like,
Yeah, like
average English, right?
yeah, like average English
Okay.
being used in serious discussions like what we were talking about. Like right now, I don't feel like we would really use neopronouns in like discussions of like life or death matters. Uh,
But then again, though, if I so here's the thing as well. So just to talk about seriousness, of course, there are going to be different contexts for seriousness, right?
mm-hmm,
Life or life or death. It's a very specific thing, right?
mm-hmm.
Our instincts kick in. So social nuances kind of go out the window. Yeah, I get that, right? So let's talk about formal settings. So I think that's a more interesting word. So formal settings includes, government. It includes education, research, business meetings, whatever. What we see now in academia is a step to degender language, because old gendered language is just not as useful anymore in that context. If I'm going to quote a group of scholars, I don't want to use masculine forms, because in Spanish, I don't know if you're familiar with Spanish, but in Spanish we have a phenomenon called the general masculine. If you have a group of 99 women and one male, you will refer to that group with a masculine, uh, morphological
Oh
feature.
yeah, that's a pretty dumb rule.
It is. You'll say todos los que están aquí. Everybody who are here. You wouldn't say todas, which is the feminine equivalent, right? So I forgot what the point was.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't. I definitely agree that there are a lot of grammatical rules that are really pointless and should be changed. I don't think that that means that everything needs to be changed or that we need to change gendered language just for the sake of doing it. I think that there are contexts where gendered language is appropriate and contexts where they're not.
Yeah. So I've remembered my point now. No, thanks for the prompt. So the reason why people are gendering language in academia, which is a very formal, a very professional setting, is because it's not as useful.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I want to say, Silverstein argues that language ideologies are whatever, and then later on I say he thinks that, well, is it relevant? is the fact that he has a penis, allegedly assuming that there has to be a biological correlation between that pronoun and his biology, is that relevant? No. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he doesn't identify as a he. Therefore, I'm kind of doing him a disservice, and I respect this.
is it relevant to what in particular?
So if I'm writing a paper on social linguistics, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Silverstein, so he died recently,
Mm-hmm.
R.I.P. A very, very, very clever man. I assume he's a man. But anyway, that's not the point. He's a fantastic academic. He studies language ideologies. He's basically the person who came up with the concept in the 1970s. Now, Silverstein is talked about frequently in my area because he's one of the big kind of people, the big name researchers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, now, when we use he and she in normal conversational English, we do it metaphorically.
Mm-hmm.
This means that we start with a clear referent, the dog, and then later mentions of that dog use pronouns it, he, she. If I'm writing an essay or an article about Silverstein or one of his arguments, I'll start off by saying Silverstein argues blah, blah, blah. And in the next reference to him, I will use a personal pronoun because language is economical and that's kind of what we do. So my inclination is to write he thinks that or he argues that rather than repeating Silverstein over and over. Like, do you kind of get what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So my point is he, in this context, i.e. Silverstein, using this personal pronoun, this gendered personal pronoun, is not actually relevant. I could use they, I could use a different substitution, I could use this scholar or this expert or whatever. The fact that I use he might actually be unhelpful because Silverstein may have transitioned, now may use different pronouns, or here's another thing, it doesn't really matter if he's a he or she.
That
So
yeah,
in
that
the,
is yeah,
so
that's
in
true.
these so in these contexts, one, these pronouns don't have to be based on objective reality because it doesn't matter if Silverstein has a penis or not. Two, we don't know if Silverstein has transitioned and rejects those pronouns. And I want to respect Silverstein because I respect his opinions. And I kind of, yeah, I think that using other people's pronouns is a form of respect. We can disagree on that, later if we want. But, I don't want to offend him. I don't want to, purposefully misgender him
Mm-hmm.
or her, So that's why we are degendering scholarship, and this is an area of society which is considered by some to be formal, professional, and high society in a way.
Okay, I
Yeah,
get
I'm
I get
interested in your
yeah,
thoughts on
yeah.
that.
I get what you're saying, and I definitely agree that the use of gendered pronouns in that context is not really relevant. But I would also say that I can't really see a strong reason to switch to gender neutral in that instance unless this author has specifically identified like, hey, I am transgender or I'm using different pronouns. Because what was my other point? Yeah, I don't really see an explicit need to prefer the gender neutral over just whatever whatever like the standard of the society is.
I,
Oh
I
yeah.
can I can I can answer this very quickly. Better safe than sorry. That's literally it, right?
I mean,
Gender neutral is always going to be more inclusive than gender specific, especially nowadays when people are relative to the population, relative to the past, transitioning more frequently, habitually rejecting gendered language. It's just safer, easier to just not do it.
yeah. I mean,
That's the need. That's the reason, pretty
yeah.
much.
I mean, I guess, but like better safe than sorry. This is better safe than sorry in an instance where there's not really a lot of danger in the first place. Like I misgender somebody and they say, actually, I use these pronouns, and then I say, oh, sorry, and it's not like by assuming their pronouns, like now they're bleeding or damaged in some ways. Just
No, no. I
I
mean,
think that. Let me make this point. I think that the hurt is a bit overstated in misgendering, and I might even go as far as to say a little bit melodramatic, to be honest.
well, what I've seen personally from people close to me, it's not the individual isolated act of misgendering. It's the entire societal disregard for trans issues and the actual discrimination that they face in addition. And we have to agree here that purposeful misgendering is a very, very easy and very overused way of insulting and delegitimizing trans people. Constantly see people purposely dead naming, misgendering people to weaponize their hatred towards that group of people.
Mm-hmm.
So in that context, to be careful and to in a context where gender isn't even relevant, just use gender neutral language. I mean, it's kind of a why not?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I don't gain anything, right? Yeah, because okay, if I say he, and he is a he, great. If he's a he and he's a she, maybe I can send an apology email. If it comes to light that this person has transitioned. It's it's with the understanding in mind that trans folk do face abuse much more than the average person does. I've got no data for that, I'll admit. But yeah,
Yeah,
language is
I
very,
mean, for a person that is very clearly trans, I can see that. Or if it's people who are trans in identification only and don't really present that way, I'm not sure if I would really believe that they face abuse. But yeah, for a person that's actually trying to live that experience in the way that they want to, I definitely see how they would experience a lot of verbal abuse and probably some unwanted touching as well. So I'm not going to deny that. The
but in a way though, and sorry to interrupt, feel free to interrupt me as well. In a way though, from what I've seen in your messages, you do kind of deny it because you do reject neopronouns. And neopronouns, as we've discussed, is one of the primary ways in which right now people can symbolize their identity with gender, or rather their non-identity with traditional gender.
Okay, well, let me clarify something. I consider trans issues and neopronoun issues to be entirely different. Like a lot of people will include non-binary with trans, but I actually
I do,
yeah,
by the way, I
yeah,
do.
yeah. And I actually don't do that because I think there is much more scientific evidence for the trans experience than there is for the non-binary experience. And I think that the non-binary experience is pretty poorly defined in general. So in my mind, I don't see neopronouns as a trans issue actually.
Well, it's interesting though because we're coming back to the kind of crux. I mean, I think the longer we talk about these things, the more I can identify why we disagree or why we have different perspectives, and that's because this whole qualitative versus quantitative kind of epistemology is, for me, non-binary people doesn't need to have a biological reference point. It doesn't need to be rooted in any objective reality. Right now, as we speak, there are thousands, if not millions, of people who identify as non-binary and have legitimate reasons and intellectualized reasons to believe so. So my role as an observer of the world, of the social world, specifically language, is to say, okay, well, these people think this, they say they're this. If it quacks like a duck and moves like a duck, then well, I'm going to describe it like a duck. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm not sure if that analogy works because I don't know what a non-binary person walks and quacks like. Like it's so poorly defined that I can't. There's nothing for me to reference other than non-conformity.
Well, I think in many ways, these categories which are difficult to conceptualize in a way which you find convincing, they are not so much grounded on purely definable concepts, but rather symbolize attitude, an ideology, a position.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So non-binariness. I'm not non-binary myself, so I'm going to point that out there for the audience. I don't want to speak over those voices. I'm a cis white man who lectures at uni, right? I'm in a relative position of privilege here. I do want to acknowledge that. But anyway, with that preface out of the way, non-binariness is the societal position of rejecting the gender binary. That's it, right? It doesn't need to have any basis in reality because it's not really based on biology.
Right. I'm glad we swung back to that because I do want to clarify my position about the basis in objective reality. Because the way I see it is if you can't really base this in objective reality, then your belief system is no better than like a religion. When I hear people telling me, this is my non binary identity, they might as well be telling me their zodiac sign. Like I'm a Sagittarius, whatever. And them telling me that I have to take that really seriously when we don't really do that for astrology, do we?
We do that for national identity. You feel American. I feel British. Other people feel Spanish, right? Catalan. These are, I mean, I'm happy, very happy to discuss these
Or
because a lot
I,
of my research is based on this. But these are fabricated constructs that derive from literally the congregation of humans in society, not from biology,
mhm.
nationhood in particular, right? So the issue I have with religion as well is that religion is inherently fixed in power structures. Well, maybe not inherently, but nowadays most religions, because of the kind of conglomerateness of it, are based in power structures. Non-binary people are not at the top of the food chain in the political world. So I don't quite like the comparison with religion, but I would like you to talk about nationalism though and why that's different.
Right. Well, I've never really had a strong national identity. Maybe it's because I'm an American black, and we don't really like America that much. Like I can probably describe how people who have a strong American identity feel. They probably are super afraid of communism, and they value freedom over everything else, and they think that America is the best country in the world. That type of stuff. I mean, I don't
What
really
what
have that
we're talking
strongly.
about
Yeah.
here is the identification, right? So this is the psychological and cultural association with something. Gender is an identity. Americanness is an identity, both of which are socially constructed. They are not the same, of course. But you saying that basically what the reason I'm bringing in national identity is because you say that religion, because it's not based on objective reality, is just like, well, tell me about your zoological, tell me about your star signs. It's a bit of a it's right. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
It's invented. Yeah, it's not relevant. Um,
But there's a lot of people that really, they really believe in their zodiac signs, and for
I do,
us,
and there's
yeah,
a lot of people who believe in America, right?
right, right. And I would have no problem with sort of deconstructing American identity. I don't really care very much for it.
Does Americanism exist in the objective world as far as you understand it, like American national identity?
I would say that it exists in people's minds in the same way that any ideology exists in people's minds. It's just a
Yeah,
belief
yeah, yeah,
system.
yeah. So ideologies are mental phenomena, but
Hmm.
ideologies are always reified, so they are made real through cultural practices, language, and beliefs or constructions, right? So American nationalism is reified in what we call banal nationalism. It's everywhere. The waving of the flag, the national anthem, the absolute fixation for politics.
Hmm.
These are all things which are basically real manifestations of ideas that we have in our head. But what I don't get is why maybe you would be okay to accept how language influences national identity or vice versa, but not so much with gender. What am I not understanding here? Why
Uh,
is national identity perhaps okay, but gender isn't?
um, well, as I've stated before, I don't really have a strong association with a national identity. To me, being an American just means I was born in America. I don't really associate that with American values, quote unquote. So I'm not sure if that really applies to me. I don't necessarily have an explicit approval of Americanism, and I don't. I guess maybe I haven't really thought about it enough to have any objections to it. It's just not really on my radar, and I wouldn't really say that I have strong feelings one way or the other about whether or not nationalism is good or not. I think it's kind of nebulous, and I think we could probably all live without it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, the context I study, which is Spain, has a central kind of national identity force, which is Spain, and then it has several peripheral minor identities, regional identities, which are constantly overshadowed and overpowered by this kind of central Spanish state. So we don't really have that in America. You the Hispanic cultures are severely overpowered by American patriotism. White religious conservatism in America is very, very dominant. But what I would like you to do, though, maybe after this conversation, is think about the mental process of national identification. Not you personally, but the actual psychological process by which people identify with this social construction of a nation. Because nations are socially constructed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I do have plenty of data to back that up. That this has been studied for hundreds of years.
Oh
Now,
yeah, I mean, I find it hard to really disagree with that. I think that
oh,
national
you would be
identity might
surprised.
be entirely socially constructed. If it's unless it's like a national identity constructed around like a population with genetic similarities, but that's
Well, I mean
obviously not what I.
that's
That's obviously not what
that's the
America
issue, isn't it?
is. Yeah. It is the issue. Yes.
I mean, but the reason why I'm drawing this up, and I do acknowledge that I have a bit more of a advantage here because I have done the homework basically on this area, and you haven't. But that's why I recommend it, because this issue that we're having with gender and neopronouns is in some ways similar to issues with national identification, right? Um, so it could broaden your understanding of it. My goal here is not to convince you. I think
Mm-hmm.
people often come to debates with the aim of convincing the other. I don't. My actual aim was to understand your perspective, because that's what I do. I observe.
Right, and I try to do that too. Like, uh, I know I'm gonna drop a name here that's not gonna be pleasant with like your group, but something that Jordan
Hope it's not
Peterson,
Peterson.
yes,
Oh no,
it's
it is
something
Peterson.
that it's something that Jordan Peterson said that I think is incredibly true. He said you need to go into a conversation with the assumption that the person on the other side has something of value, and I think that's true.
Yeah, fair enough. Even if it comes from, yeah, okay, I'm not going to dismiss it just because it came from his mouth. You know what I mean? I'm not going to be one of those people.
Right, right.
But yeah, right. And I do hope, me being here and clarifying the tweets has at least done something. Um, I'm not going to lie. Even though my goal isn't to convince you, it would be nice that this exchange has been somewhat of intellectual value. Um,
Right, right. I do
but
want to discuss one other thing
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
kind of got left in the weeds because I understand that you didn't really appreciate the religion analogy, but I do want to go back to that because there is a reason for that. The way
Yeah,
that
yeah, go on.
yeah the way that people sort of talk about some of the gender stuff, from what I can tell, is it starts with the assumption that there is a gender binary and goes from there and never actually proves that a gender binary exists. And I kind of liken that to the assumption that God exists and then rationalizing from there. But I often will ask people, well, what is the gender binary? And I don't really get answers a lot because I'm pretty sure everybody can answer it individually, but if you asked 100 people, you get 100 different answers. So you,
Yeah, and this is something which I am going to draw parallels with national identity as well. Is when something is so ingrained in society, it's taken for granted. Right now, things which are taken for granted, especially if they're socially constructed, have immense power. Becomes normalized. It becomes assumed. Right. I would believe the reason why people may not be able to distinguish or problematize gender binariness is because it's so ingrained in society. Now, we see this all of the time with national identity, especially in America, because it's the status quo. Of course, we love America, right? Of course, Trump is great or whatever. But that's not always the case, and that might not sound very convincing now that I'm listening to myself. But
I mean,
um,
I kind of would liken that to a religious type belief, like the America worship. Like I definitely don't really subscribe to that, and I think it's kind of weird. Like I don't
yeah.
understand how conservatives can like just blindly just love America and not see any of the bad things and not want to criticize anything. Like I've never personally understood that, and I would liken that to a religious type belief, like an unyielding faith in an idea.
Yeah, and the extreme forms of nationalism have been compared quite frequently in the scholarship with religious ideologies, and in some cases they intersect quite nicely, as is the case with American nationalism and evangelicism. But to go back to the point I'd like to make, Um, oh, I'm terrible for this. Every time I change an idea, my brain just switches off. You said something about. Oh, what was the last point you made?
The last point I made was it was about how gender binary is not clearly defined, and I think that
Thank you. Yeah, yeah,
people start with that as an assumption.
yeah. Well, that's because gender binary doesn't exist in the way that I think you're trying to make me believe it does. At least not for many people. And if it does exist, it's kind of normalized,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where you can observe this all of the time. And if you were to get a researcher to tag along and as a ghost, it'll never happen. But just entertain the thought. You were to go to a few random families in America, you will start to see how gendered society is, right? From down to the marketing, down to what teachers say in school, even though, and that's why it's so difficult to define what
Well, yeah,
binary is, because
marketing definitely. Yeah, I can see that for sure. When I personally think of the binary, and I think that this is very common in the gender critical community, like we refer to that as male female stereotypes, like literally stereotypes, and there's an implicit acceptance that not everybody's going to fit that stereotype, but it's just in the gender critical community, like we don't really think that that makes you non-binary. We kind of just see that as just like, yeah, that's kind of always been the case. Like I think that the binary conception comes more so from media, like you were talking about, and like magazine covers, because like things like magazine covers give us a really hyper stereotypical conception of what a woman should be or what a man should be.
I mean, textbooks. I study textbooks, and we see all the time, stereotypical representations of race, stereotypical representations of the ideal English speaker, stereotypical ideas of, yeah, a man and a woman, right? So when you have children's textbooks, what are the girls wearing? They're always wearing a dress. What are the boys doing? They're playing with a toy. What are the women doing? They're cooking, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'll refer you again to the concept of banal. So
Yes. It,
banality. So banal nationalism, banal genderism. It's when something is so ingrained in society, it's taken for granted. We see that all the time.
okay. I actually
Also,
that's a really good point, and we can stand to undo some of that stuff. But go ahead.
we are, and that's exactly what we see. I will acknowledge this as well. This gender constructivism is in its infancy, and as such, it will have teething problems.
Mm-hmm.
We may not have on an individual level on Twitter where academic stuff is only leaking into popular use, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I have no doubt that if you were to speak to academics, they would give you damn good sources and good arguments. You may not like them, but they will give it to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this whole movement, again, critical race theory is a great example. It's only starting now to become part of wider popular discourse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that is probably something that you're going to have to take into account in future debates, because not everybody is an expert. Not everyone even knows that
Oh
people are
yeah. Well, I
problematizing
mean,
language.
I kind of feel like I'm more aware of that than the average person. That a lot of the stuff is still in the process of changing. And you did bring up a good point that academics will do a better job of talking about this stuff than like your average Twitter person. But the problem that I see is that on a platform like Twitter, a 13-year-old has the same the same ability to discuss this as like somebody who has a PhD. And within these communities, these people who are like still young and still learning are discussing ideas and convincing themselves that this is the way the world is, and now they're foisting their like conceptualization of these really complex ideas into like the general public. And I think that's what causes a lot of the confusion, is that they're taking something that's really that's very well understood in academic fields, and it's kind of being exposed to people who are still learning. And
Yeah,
it's not your
yeah.
fault or anything. It's just kind of the nature of the
No, it
platform.
does happen. It does happen. I've seen myself. In fact, I'm actually quite impressed by it, to be honest. I admittedly was, lurking a debate, and I clicked on one of the person's profile, and they were like, I think it was 14. didn't stay very long for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual intellectual maturity of which this person was discussing, like complex sociological theory, like in some ways, clearly it was repeated, right? It was learned language.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the ability to navigate with that language in that way, it was really, really fascinating. But I do, yeah, okay, in part, yeah. Young people are being influenced by the internet, and that will go with many, many, many different sectors, like radicalization of conservatives, QAnonism, incilism.
Mm-hmm.
These are things which are kind of accelerated thanks to the internet and the instant connectivity of people and communities. I don't think it's limited to people who are deconstructing genders.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no,
I
not at
don't,
all, not at all. Yeah, it
don't think
exists
you're on the
everywhere. Yeah.
claim either. But yeah, I do think if we are going to problematize one aspect of that, then it's going to happen with another. And I do think that the internet should have a bit more parental supervision.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be a bit of an issue if you have conservative parents and you already know at the age of 13 that you are not that, which again is very frequently overlooked. A lot of my research looks at what young people think about.
Mm-hmm.
My area of expertise is language with adolescents, and a lot of people dismiss their intellectual capabilities and awareness of the world just because they're under the age of 18. And I found personally, and many people have found this, that we always chronically underestimate their intellectual abilities. Always.
Right. Well,
um
I mean,
the
you'd have to be a pretty exceptional person to be like, you know, like really on point with some of this stuff because as humans, we start with a lack of knowledge and we build upon that knowledge. So, I mean, I think it's a pretty safe assumption that somebody that's 15 probably still has a lot to learn, even though conceivably they may be like a genius and have figured all this stuff out, but I think it's a safer assumption that they probably still have more things to learn.
Yeah, of course. I mean, a 15-year-old brain's always going to be a 15-year-old brain. There's going to be
Yeah.
deviations of that. But in my experience, and this could be entirely a flaw in my sampling, which is entirely possible. My sampling isn't perfect, but generally a generalization is that the students I interact with are very aware of issues which society claims they are not.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, to kind of go back. I would like to kind of in these final moments, I would like to kind of synthesize what key issues you still have, right?
Okay.
Because we've
Yeah.
talked about a lot of things, and I'd like to know what things do you just still not agree with?
So this point that we talked about with the children kind of does lead to what is ultimately the reason why I'm so ambivalent about neopronouns is because the way I see it as people who have not fully thought through these ideas, going off on a tangent that leads them into really weird territories where we get like demon pronouns and
Yeah. Okay.
anime sexual and that type of stuff. So
Yeah.
my ambivalence is with these complex ideas being disseminated by people who are not mature enough to really understand it and then giving them the moral high ground to call somebody a bigot for not using their pronouns, like essentially. So I guess my gripe is that I think that these ideas are good in principle, but we need to be, we can't just be gung ho about changing everything. Like we need to sort of like kind of wrangle this back in and, bring it back to something sensible. And that's why like when it comes to like non-binary people, I was willing to make the compromise of like, okay, I'll use they them. But like if you're gonna introduce other pronouns, I need to like for it to make sense for me, I need it to be distinguishable from they them. Like what reason do I have to use je jure other than they them? Like in what grammatic context would that be more appropriate or not?
Okay.
Is it, yeah,
Well,
it's
I mean,
essentially what I mean.
I'm glad that we can, we're talking about this directly as well, because I think a lot of the conversation that we've had have helped contextualize this discussion, and this level of detail we absolutely couldn't have done even over weeks and weeks over Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
It just wouldn't have been possible. So I think, and I do still think this, and I'll start by quoting something that we do a lot in my field, and then I'll return to an idea I had in my tweets. So in my field, in social linguistics, we very frequently start with the assumption that debates about language are never only about language, right? People who want to prohibit the use of Spanish in America, is that because they literally, do not want Spanish in schools, or is it because they don't want Spanish speakers infiltrating a monolingual society, which it isn't, by the way? So, we have this assumption that discussions about language are never really about language alone. So when I was reading your interactions on Twitter, and when I was seeing you you said that you are ambivalent towards neopronouns. I would say that in your Twitter interactions, you were staunchly against neopronouns. So either your position's changed or you're being polite.
Well, I am kind of being polite because, like, when I sort of I have this thing where I will conceive, like, when I'm unsure of something, I would do the thought tree of both conclusions. Like, if neopronouns are legitimate, then this that. If they're not, then this that. And, like, in my personal opinion, I think that they're kind of incoherent and dumb. But, like, I do have a space reserved for somebody to explain it to me in a way that makes some sort of sense. So it's like I do have I do have my personal position, but I'm not completely closed off.
Yeah, we all do, and you do self-identify as very stubborn, in your profile, which I don't know if it's satirical, but
Yeah, no, it's true. I'm pretty stubborn. Like, I've had to accept that.
Because well, first of all, stubbornness, is a bit of a hindrance when it comes to like exploration and stuff. But that is something that is not strictly relevant to the discussion. What I will say though is your rejection towards neopronouns, I believe, is not linguistic. Right? This is I want to I do want to finalize the discussion on that point. Unless you want to bring in something later. But my argument here is that you do not have a particularly convincing social linguistic or grammatical or linguistic basis to reject neopronouns, and rather your issue stems from the people themselves. Right? Are linked in many ways, right? But again, I think your issue is with trans people or non-binary people or people who use neopronouns rather than the actual linguistic means by which they express themselves.
Okay. Well, I get what you're saying, and I would say that my objection to neopronouns is that I think that if we start just changing words just for the sake of subverting gender norms, we might risk losing some of our ability to communicate some things. And I will admit that it's probably not going to be that way in most circumstances. Like, it's probably immaterial in most circumstances, but I think that there are some circumstances where it's going to be important, like when it's life or death, or when it's, well, I mean, it's mostly when it comes down to like physical differences between men and women. Like, I think we still need to be able to preserve that, and I'm sure you'll agree that language and words shape the way that we understand the world. And I think that we run the risk of, if we accept these things too readily, then we may have a generation of people who don't necessarily understand that they are like, if you're a male, that there are relevant differences between you and a female that you need to be cognizant of when you're interacting with them. And
Yeah, okay.
that's kind of my fear.
Yeah, fear is the kind of operational word there. There is a lot of unknown, and people don't like change. And what we are seeing right now, which doesn't happen very often, what hasn't happened very often throughout the course of history, is rapid language change. People historically, in many cultures, hate changing language. This is why people think that words like poggers are less valid than like cool, right? Not really. No, it's just they've emerged in different contexts, and they are appropriate in different times and spaces. There are two elements of that final point that you made. One is about maturity, right? Especially with young speakers. And I can actually speak as an authority on that, because I have literally done research with adolescents about what they think about emerging language features, right? I'm not the only person who's done this, but I literally have done the scholarship, I've done the research, and I've actually I've contributed to our understanding of this topic. And I will reiterate that final point I made, that as a society, we habitually, constantly, overwhelmingly underestimate young people.
Hmm.
And you would be surprised about how much they do actually understand the world. And yeah, I'm going to say that, acknowledging that, they don't understand everything. My God, do they understand more than we give them credit for? Secondly, when it comes to efficiency and utility, this is the kind of linguistic issue I have with the most, right? Because utility in language is socially constructed by meaning. What is useful or considered useful in one context does absolutely differ in another, and I'll be happy to give you plenty of
Mm-hmm.
examples of that.
So
So
this actually is something that I wanted to talk about, but I'm afraid that if we start now, we're gonna talk for another 30 minutes. But
I'll try to be concise. Go on.
yeah. So I did consider that beforehand, the utility question, and I I was gonna ask. My starting question was gonna be, what utility do neopronouns provide?
Yeah, so basically the validation of other people.
The validation. Okay, and
That's primarily it. Yeah.
okay.
The rejection of neopronouns is the de-validation of people who use pronouns. It's like, phenomenon exists in the world now. Neopronouns exist. We need to now position ourselves with or against them.
So
And
it's validating the fact that they exist, or the fact that they use the pronouns.
both and all, kind of, yeah. So, you know, if you use neopronouns, you are telling other speakers that you, through constructed meaning, because you have to have a certain intellectual level and social cultural awareness of gendered pronouns and what neopronouns are, etc., etc. I mean, a little kid might not understand what a xer is, but would understand a him or a her, right? Because this is still very new in our vocabularies, in our social awareness. The utility, the social utility, is of course validation and the acknowledgement of a particular group,
Mm-hmm.
and of course the deconstruction of gender norms.
Right, and to that end, I mean, I don't necessarily think I'm convinced by that point, because it's such an artificial construction of a class that, it seems like it's sort of just, how do I say this without being mean? Like, it seems sort of like attention seeking behavior. Like, I don't like the way that I have existed in the world has not been seeking validation for, well, no, I have sort of sought validation for concepts like, people respecting that I'm like educated and that type of thing. Like, that's why I get mad.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to, and I was a bit worried that you'd take it
yeah,
in the
yeah,
wrong way,
yeah, yeah.
which would be entirely normal.
But even in that scenario, it's validation of a specific thing, whereas this validation seems solely to create a new category that I am not sure if I agree with. It's the reason that it's being created.
I
Like,
mean,
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, this is the kind of golden rule, really, of human interaction. You don't sometimes you don't have to understand. Sometimes, this happens a lot with gay people, with parents, right? They come out as gay, and the parents reject it immediately. Now,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes what the kids just want is, they just want to accept it. Like, you don't have to agree or disagree with it, but I do exist in this way. I am attracted to the same sex. Like, this is something that is happening. I can't change. Okay, it's not the best example, because you can change your pronouns and stuff, but what they ask for is acceptance in a world where they are constantly rejected.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people who use neopronouns are neurodivergent, autism, ADHD,
Now see,
others, right?
but yeah, but see, that's a basis. That's a basis. Like, that is actually something. Like, I can get behind that. Like, that's better than, that's better than I use neopronouns because I use neopronouns. Like I can sort of make sense of that. Like,
Well, I mean, I'm glad you can though, because that is one reason why people do claim to use neopronouns, and neurodivergency is one of them. And why neurodivergency? Because well, we live in a very stereotypical world, and that is based a lot on gender norms and expectations and how people should be. And neurodivergent people often don't conform to those standards.
Mm-hmm.
And a way of symbolizing that is saying, well, f you, he and she. I'm not what society wants me to be. I'm this.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, though, is you don't, in my opinion, you don't need a neurological divergence to legitimize using neopronouns or not. Because for me, self identification is a relevant source of identification.
Mm-hmm.
It always will be, because in my kind of discipline, we respect what people have to say about themselves. They are authorities of themselves.
Well,
That
right.
is the basis for a lot of sociological research.
Well, my response would be that I need the reference to something like neurodivergence so that I can bring it above the level of an astrology, because I think we talked about that earlier. Than like when somebody
Mm.
says like I'm a Sagittarius and just like okay, and like we have that response because we kind of implicitly are just like okay, this is kind of fantasy land. And in order for me to take this out of fantasy land and into the realm of things that I take seriously, I need that reference to something other than you and your feelings, you know?
But feelings are real, and people. Well, sorry about the motorbike. People do have feelings, and feelings are important. We are social beings. We need emotions to live in a social world. So here's a question: do you need to approve of them? Like, why can't you just like? Why is this something that's so important to you? Like, if you don't understand their struggles, which you don't, because you don't go through it, you need to.
Well,
Is
there's
it not okay to say, okay, well, fair enough, yeah, go on, use they them?
yeah, well, sometimes I do just stick with the okay, well, whatever, and just use what they want me to use. Like I won't really use neopronouns, but I'll use they them, and I mean,
It
I,
comes down to that
yeah.
it does more harm than good thing, doesn't it? Like so
But
like the opposite of doing more harm than good.
does it really like do you believe in the idea of like tough love, of like sometimes you have to tell somebody something that they don't like to get them to snap out of like a bad set
do,
of
I do
beliefs?
I do sometimes, but what bad are young people doing by saying this world which categorizes people as strictly male and strictly female and uses language in that way? That doesn't make sense to them. And I from a professional, like, academic point of view, I can see why. Right? The world isn't neat boxes which people want us to kind of fit in. So I don't see that there's harm in changing elements of language which is completely okay. Like, so basically, another thing that I haven't mentioned is these neopronouns, and this comes back to your discussion on efficiency with regard to communication. Neopronouns are still pronouns, right? They have the same syntactical um, attributes as any other traditional pronoun has. We even decline them, right? So when
Mm-hmm.
people use neopronouns, they have the nominative form, a, and the
Mm-hmm.
accusative form, them, when the pronoun falls within the position of a direct object in the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So the only things that are changing are the referential value, the meaning, and the sounds. So it's very hard for me to say neopronouns bad, new words good,
Right, right.
because it doesn't actually distort the language linguistically more than what you probably think it does. And as a linguist, that's kind of what I'm trying to get to here when I say that if someone uses a neopronoun, even if you are not fully aware of who the referent is, it's okay, because language is ambiguous sometimes. Language is imprecise sometimes. And the beauty about humans is that we have the ability to ask for more information in a way which rocks can't.
Right, but
So
I'm sure you
the
would
art,
agree
go on.
that I'm sure you'd agree, or at least I hope you'd agree that like if everybody started picking their own pronouns, then it would become kind of silly, huh? Like there's got to be a limit to it. Like we can't just.
It, that's a slippery slope. I believe. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that's a slippery slope fallacy
Well,
because
I mean,
one,
you say that, but like, have you ever seen Libs of TikTok? Like, there's people who have had bug pronouns and demon pronouns and that type of stuff. Like,
and people also troll. I'm not denying that these people exist, but satire is a thing. What is it? Libertarians of TikTok. Yeah, like that account is posting from a very clear ideological standpoint,
yeah,
right? They are deliberately picking very provocative
yeah.
examples to get people
But
riled
I
up.
mean, you kind of said that they're satire, but how do you judge that they're satire? Like, what criteria do you say this pronoun is a joke and this pronoun isn't? Like, I just don't see how you can
I mean,
like
yeah, you're
clearly.
right. You're right. It's arbitrary. It's arbitrary, and that's because pronouns are arbitrary, right? What we consider to be conventional and useful is decided by us, not something that's inherent to the word itself, which is another issue I had with your kind of objective reality
Yeah,
thing. But yeah, you are right. You are right. There's no significant difference beyond our willingness to accept the legitimacy of those pronouns between demon self and xer self. Right?
right.
So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, to a point, yeah, okay. You could say, right, well, if everyone starts picking neopronouns, then well, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be difficult to communicate, but that's not going to be the case because a this group are a minority of people, as in trans people. B, I think that's I don't think I have a B.
yeah. Well, I think that part of the reason that I do what I do is so that that doesn't become the case because I mean I think that the younger generation is going to be very susceptible to this, and I think that this
Again,
trend, yeah,
before you continue, I
yeah,
will say I do think and I do continue to believe that again, this isn't a linguistic issue that you have. I think this is a social issue that you have.
oh yeah, I mean I would agree with that.
Okay, okay.
You in fact I did want to touch on something earlier. You said that you used the phrase rapid language change, and I kind of like mentally noted that because I would not have used those words. I would have said language change for a social agenda, and I kind of think that that is what's behind it. Is that the purpose of the creation of neopronouns is specifically just to change the culture, and I'm okay with changing the culture, but not just for no reason. Like I want to
Yeah,
address
well,
specific problems and change the specific problems, not just you know start making generalized changes that we don't even really think about.
yeah, I mean, the social linguistics literally means social linguistics languages, but it's a bi-directional relationship. Language influences society in the same way that society influences language. What we see with neopronouns is just one of that bi-directionality angle.
Hmm.
Right? And it doesn't have it can happen simultaneously. It can happen at higher levels. It can happen at lower levels of society, as like top down, bottom up. But this it's what I said before about is it a coincidence that broader constructions of biological sex to socially constructed gender, is it a coincidence that we're now seeing changes in the language itself? No, absolutely not. And that's because of that bidirectional relationship. Again, I think you try to use a lot of linguistic arguments in your defense of stopping spread of gender nonconformity amongst youth.
Hmm.
Whereas I think what I'm saying is, well, kind of using language as a tool to do that, and sadly, linguists don't kind of agree with where you're using language. Right? That's kind of my position on this.
Okay. Okay. Uh, well, I think we are getting to a wrapping up point because I think we
Yeah, it's
both
been
I
two
think
hours
yeah
already. Like
I
that's gone quickly.
I think we've both like kind of gotten our points across.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
ultimately, my like we talked about this before. My concern is for the quality of our communication, and I think that if we are just incredibly gung ho about changing words around, then we may result in two populations that are no longer able to really communicate with each other effectively. And that's kind of where I'm at with it. I might be, yeah, I might be, what's the word? You said slippery slope. It's something like that. That may
Yeah, yeah.
be, yeah, it may be a slippery slope, but I mean, with some of the stuff I've seen coming out of like younger kids, like I'm just like, man, this is kind of getting weird. So I mean, yeah, that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, it's also getting weird, but there are other kids who are shooting up schools in America,
Yeah,
and they come from a culture which is normalized and they're deemed perfectly acceptable. This idea that gun culture is perfectly normal. We should literally kill people we disagree with. I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a punch there, but I'm not saying that all Americans like that at all. But you know, uh, the school shooters come from one aspect of American society, and these kids who are exploring themselves come from another. But in relation to your kind of final statement, I just want to say that a lot of your arguments are using language, but are not language arguments. Like, do you understand that distinction?
I'm no, I'm not.
Okay, so basically, just to reiterate the points I've made earlier, your arguments are not linguistic. You are weaponizing language to make political arguments, basically. Um,
And
st-
is making neopronouns not the same thing? Like we're literally going to make these pronouns to advance our social agenda. Is that not weaponizing language?
it is. It's not. I'm not delegitimizing your stance here. I'm just describing what you are doing because I think in some of your Twitter conversations, you talk about language in a way which you are kind of authoritative on it, or language works this way when um, I'm trying to show that it kind of doesn't in how
Right,
we understand it, right?
right,
But I guess the biggest issue I have now, and again, I don't need to expand on this, is that a lot of your issues don't really stem from now. It's more of a fear of the future, and I wonder how well useful that is when the future is unknown and it's a bit nebulous. It's a bit okay,
I mean,
kind of
we do have some,
catastrophizing.
yeah, we have some hints with the online culture and what the future could look like if this doesn't stay online and becomes the general trend. Like like I said, I'm not completely opposed to undoing gender norms, but I don't think that we just do that by just making changes just for the sake of making changes. I think we need to make specific planned out changes, and I don't think that neopronouns are that.
I mean, I think neopronouns are harmless. I think the radicalization of youth in any context is bigger issue here, and neopronouns are a very very fun thing to make fun of because you see this little kid saying I'm dinosaur self and dinosaur Xia, or whatever kind of silly. Some of them are silly. They are right, and it's very easy to point your finger
Yeah.
and say
And
that's stupid.
I could also throw out that this type of stuff hurts the trans movement because trans people want their identities to be taken seriously. But if you got dinosaur selves out there and all identities are valid, then that in turn makes trans people's identity look silly too. So like,
Can do. There's some convincing aspect of that argument, right? But when you start saying whose identities are not valid when it's not your concern, like a whole point of this is identities are constructed within the
well,
self, and they are acknowledged, they are legitimized or rejected through other people.
it
If you
becomes my
start to say,
concern when they're demanding that I respect them and use certain words. That's when it
oh,
becomes
you
my
have you have the choice not to.
yes.
Just because someone uses neopronouns doesn't mean you're forced to do it. In the same way that you're not forced to obey the laws, which are similarly social constructions, right?
Mm-hmm.
But but we do have consequences, and if we live in a society that has deemed what is respectful is a society where pronouns or neopronouns are respected, which doesn't exist yet, by the way, then yeah, doing that will have consequences. We're never going to live in a world without consequences, but no one's ever going to force you to say them.
Mm-hmm. Right,
So
right,
I don't think there's any harm. Yeah,
right,
it's been
right.
2 hours, and if you want to wrap up, that's fair enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can stop there. Yeah, we can stop there.
Cool, right?
Cool. Well, I would like to say that you've been a very good faith interlocutor, and I will be taking a lot of the things that you said in mind. Uh, I hope. I guess the only thing that I want you to take from my position is that I feel like there's a lack of order and direction when it comes to the neopronouns issue, and it
Yeah,
has
fair enough. Yeah.
become a little bit too arbitrary. And I hope that the people on that side can, sort of go in a direction that aims at something instead of just doing
I mean,
whatever.
it's kind of the beauty of the movement as well, because gender norms are kind of reified. They are given power through structures, which, like, education, administration, school, whatever. And a lot of this is coming from the bottom up. It's coming from speakers themselves in a very decentralized way, even though Twitter is a kind of centralized platform. But anyway, the beauty of it is the arbitrariness of it, I think. And it's still in its infancy. Who knows where it'll go. um, the vast majority of people are not going to accept neopronouns anytime soon, especially particularly obviously alien ones like demon gender and stuff like that. But
Mm-hmm.
stuff like xerix them as synonyms for they them, I think they're totally acceptable. And yeah, I think we can end with that.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, this has been a good talk.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Yeah, my throat hurts. I've been teaching all day, but
All right. Well, yeah, you have a good afternoon.
yeah, you too. And I still follow you, so no doubt I'll probably reply to some of your stuff at some
Mm-hmm.
point.
And I promise I'm not gonna put up a weird clickbait title that mischaracterizes you. I don't do that type of thing.
Crazy college
Yeah, yeah.
professor.
Crazy leftist professor says that gender is yeah. So I'm not gonna do that.
Well, feel free to send me the link when you're done. I'd like to listen back to it and think about it. And again, if you want references of anything to do with any of the topics that we've mentioned, like, I've literally got hundreds and hundreds of texts.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Easily.
I can't claim to be intellectually honest if I don't read the things that people send me. So feel free to.
Okay.
All right. Well, yeah. It's
Well,
been nice
have,
talking
have
to
a
you.
good evening.
Mhm.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.